Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Ruchi Sinha from the Center for Criminology and Justice, School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Today we are going to be doing a module on Indian history of social work profession. The objectives of this module are to inform you of the historical context of social work in India, to enable students to critically understand the profession of social work, enable your understanding of the development of professionalism in social work, and to engage you with the paradigm shifts in the development of social work in India. But before we begin with the history of social work in India, it is important to understand what is history and how is history presented to us. Often, if you go back to your school days, I'm sure if you remember your days, you were told Babur came to India after Babur Humayun fought so many wars, then Akbar, etc., etc. There were dates, there were times, and maybe a bit boring. But when history is simply presented in a chronological form, what it tends to do is it misses out on the larger context within these episodes happened. So as a result, the hegemonic concepts that are there, the historical accounts which are presented to us, they're largely half. We do not know how the people presented themselves and how did the people behave in that particular context. So this module is basically going to present the socio-political tensions and contradictions in Indian society in the backdrop of Indian colonial encounters and the emergence of social work in these contexts that shaped our discipline. Now, why do we have to do this? You would probably say, what do we do with history and why should we understand history? History is very important because it helps you to engage with the discipline in a manner which would provide you an opportunity to be critical and reflective. It would also make you self-aware about what this discipline is all about and why and how it emerged in a particular manner in India. One normal question that I ask in class is that what do you know about history? And the students tend to respond ancient history, medieval history, modern history, contemporary. But when I ask and I explore what beyond that, I get incidents and I get events. But when I try to ask, can you tell me what games the children play at that point of time? And except for ancient history students, if there's someone who's done graduation in history, they tend to say that there were certain toys that were found in the excavation from the Indus Valley civilization, beyond which there was nothing. Now, if we do not know how people behaved and how people interacted, why do we know history? And that is the reason you need to know history, because the principal engagement for social work is people. Our principal engagement is not events. So we understand history from the people's point of view. We understand elements of social service that existed in India. We have a very rich tradition of social service. And from there come to the final leg, which is what is social work. Now, when we're talking about history, and I'm very clearly aligned to history in India, it is important to understand that India is to be understood in the global context. At this time, as you've done in the previous modules, and I'm sure you've understood that, the period of enlightenment had happened and the Western world was stepping into the realism world. What is realism? If you remember those modules, it very clearly says that it is basically moving out from the scientific reality into the social reality, understanding the social conditions of the contemporary context and the details of everyday life. So this had started happening in the Western world. Another thing, dear students, you have to understand that as social work students, don't make the blunder of reading only social work texts. You have to be aware and you have to be critical about texts in all disciplines. Please read literature, period literature also. So at one point when you're reading, say, Charles Dickens, you also have to read Prem Chand. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of other languages literature, but every region and every language has its own literature which will give you the historical past of the place or the state that you stay in. So please read these and they will give you a lucid understanding of of what was the reality at that point of time. For example, if I pick up Charles Dickens, it very beautifully showcases the everyday life of people during the time of Industrial Revolution. It gives you the extent of destitution, it gives you the living conditions, and it also gives the level of oppression that existed. Now, if I put that together with the economic context that was there, that meant that people were moving from rural to urban, people were removed from their lived reality, and now if I put it in the political context, we get to understand that from monarchy we were shifting to the state context. All this put together, people were definitely were not the priority of the state, of the monarchy, of the economy, or of the work every day. Thus, sociologically, politically, economically, please interpret history with all these contexts. In India, contextually, we had also stepped into modernity. What does this mean? We had moved into the post-Mughal period, and we were experiencing colonialization in its full extent by now. And there were people who were experiencing the past, that is, what was the initial monarchy or the initial rule that they were experiencing, which was equally exploitative at any point of time, whether it was ancient India or whether it was medieval India, and the experience of oppression under the colonial rule. One difference that happened here was English education. Now, English education was both liberating as well as oppressing. Why do I say liberating? Liberating because here the access to education was not based upon caste, it was based upon class. So all those who were rich got access to English education, and all those who were poor remained at the bottom level. And it was oppressive because it was aligned to what the Britishers wanted us to understand. So as you must have read in your 8th class textbooks, English was given to us primarily to ensure that Indian servants could be prepared to serve the British bosses. So can you see how it is liberating and oppressing at both sides? In the end, definitely we gained a bit from it, but in the process we lost on the wisdom that was there in our regional languages. Along with English education, another change that happened was the emergence of print media. And print media ensured that there was spread of information and ideas, which was in a way again liberating for many people. So as at that point of time, when all these changes were happening, there were associations that came up. Now these associations were an expression, or they showcased a culture of seva that existed in India in all religions. So in the previous modules, you have done the various reform movements that have happened, the Brahmo Samaj, the Arya Samaj, the Theosophical Society, the Aligarh movement, and the Satyashodak Samaj. All these have been showcased as being path breakers. Again, students, please go back to your 8th and 9th standard, where it was so they did path breaking work. It was brilliant, and it showcased the oppression that women were going through, or certain sections of society were going through. But what I think they must have missed out telling you is that who started these in the sense, I'm sure you were aware that Dayanand Saraswati started, Raja Ram Mohan Roy started, but were we told in our school at any point of time that they were English educated Indian elites? Now what does this mean? Basically, they were well-meaning individuals. They were people who wanted to ensure that there was certain amount of emancipation of what they saw around. But somewhere they had assimilated the Western ideas which were grafted onto the organic living, Indian living traditions. So my liberalism over Indian tradition. So in many ways, they failed to break through the social customs that existed. They tried to improve upon the context, but they could not change the context. So if you go back to most of the religions, you will see that there is the concept of charity. You have Dan Punya in the Hindu religion, you have Zakat in the Islamic religion, Islamic tradition, and you have alms giving in the Christianity. Now all this put together was basically the whole context of Dan. Now Dan if you look at it, was essentially, it started off with the prospect of giving alms to the Brahmins, the priests. And it was an individual act to actually, in many ways, garner some amount of recognition for the netherworld. Now, this Dan and Punya was actually an act of charity which was motivated by self-interest rather than welfare of society. So, the social service leaders or the social reform movement leaders, they basically attempted to transform this notion of Dan. So, do you realize that it was the notions of Dan and it was the notions of assimilation that was worked upon by a reformer? The space, the individual space of Dan, which was aligned to by many people for personal gains, was now attempted to be moved into the public space, wherein the negotiation to include people beyond the realm of existence of these people was attempted at. And this was basically, the aim was for the benefit of society, that one cannot negate, but was the aim of this action purposive and conscious or unconscious is something that defines the basic shift in paradigm. So the various movements that started, that they were largely initiated by the upper caste, and they espoused the upper class notions of change. So no, they never asked probably that what is the change that you wanted. They said, no, this is a bad practice and we need to remove it. And how do we need to remove it? They decided. The people did not decide. At one side we had the whole notion of Dan, and on the other side there was this notion of seva. Now seva was the context which helped people to move out from the traditionally defined areas. So seva permitted that space where the Hindu elite especially could basically find a self-respecting way to step out of their boundaries and do work outside. So if anyone at that point of time wanted to help someone who belonged to the othered community, they would say that seva karne ja rahe hain, and hence seva would be accepted. So seva essentially became a medium where the colonial, that is the universal norms, and the indigenous practice of sympathy and charity came together. This provided one of the most important elements to the ethical configuration of Indian ideal of welfare in the 20th century development state. Here we'll give you one example, and there's a reading attached to this towards the end in the e-text. There is one collective that was known as the Harijan Sevak Sangh. It was initially known as All India Anti-Untouchability League. It was constituted as early as 1932 and in short form AUL, but it was renamed as Harijan Sevak Sangh by Madan Mohan Malviya. And it is through this that the differences in the whole approach to the concept of Dalits, to the concepts of caste, emerged between Gandhi and Ambedkar. Gandhi was a person who definitely wanted to address the issue of caste, but his thesis was that it needs to be done in a manner which would not lead to an upheaval. It should be done with the good intentions of the oppressors, or of the oppressed against the oppressors, and hence he would look at a collective that would go out and do certain tasks so that the other would feel included. However, Ambedkar, who was very, very clear that exclusion at this level cannot be obtained at the behest of goodwill, stated, in fact, I quote what he said. He said, I think the first thing that the League should undertake is a campaign all over India to secure to the depressed classes the enjoyment of their civic rights, such as taking water from the village wells, entry in village schools, admission to village chowries, use of public conveyance, etc. Such a program, if carried out into villages, will bring about the necessary social revolution in the Hindu society, without which it will never be possible for society for the depressed classes to get equal social status. So do you see the difference? One view which is saying that change can be brought about incrementally, slowly, and one which is saying that increment and slowly and goodwill will not get us anywhere. There are certain spaces which have to become common, and giving access to that would lead to interaction, and it would dispel whatever differences are there between the two communities. And this difference is the organic difference between a certain approach of social work and another approach of social work. So in this backdrop, now if you keep this historical context, the emergence of social work becomes quite relevant. So I'm sure you're clear by now that the early 19th century preempted the emergence of social work professionally in India, and it was tempered by, it did get some amount of shape by the Indian traditions, and colonialism added its own flavor to its emergence. A lot of the credit initially was given to the educated middle class, who attempted to think beyond the given at that point of time. But as I've already stated, that their approach as of today needs to be questioned and critiqued. And critique basically, students, means not criticism, it means criticizing with positive, that what could have been different that would have led to a different outcome. Another thing that was happening parallelly was the advent of colonialism also had missionaries involved in a whole lot of activities, and they accompanied the British colonizers. Their engagement with communities which were hitherto untouched. They were not even probably visible by the mainstream communities in India. So the missionaries managed to approach those communities and bring about a certain amount of visibility and change in them. Now this became a source of concern for a certain class of elites. Now why should it become a source of concern? Because after all, they were not touched by anyone. But historically, if you read the Indian text and Indian history, it emerges that the anxiety which was publicly expressed as well, that there was a lot of concern regarding declining Hindu population. Now, the reason why I'm stressing this right now is that this is something often you will see world over is talked about, and there is always the powerful group which will talk about decline in population. So when there was this population shift in various countries, there was this fear that the whole country would be wiped out. However, time and again it has been proven that the ratio of living in a given country probably remains the same. However, one can question that. It is against this backdrop, so the historical evolution, the Indian traditions, the colonizing, and the missionaries, all these are appearing and are occurring in our Indian context. Now, it is in this backdrop that J.M. Kumarappa, he made a plea for instituting training in India, and this is mentioned in the Bombay Chronicle, which is dated January 6, 1936. I quote again: "The need of good and sound courses in social science and social training, fruitful alike on the academic and on the practical side, is so patent to anyone who watches the growth of social service in India that the method of accomplishing this aim seems now worthy of full discussion. In West, social work has already come to be considered a part of citizenship training, since social work plays such an important role in national regeneration. It is fit to include a discussion on the subject." So it was as early as 1936 that the plea to begin social work in India was made by J.M. Kumarappa. I follow this up with another writing that he has written soon after, where he says, I quote, "The rise of professional social work is an annal of yesteryears. It is a product of the Industrial Revolution, which began in India in the latter half of 19th century and created a new pattern of society based more on competition than on tradition. This new pattern, based on urbanity, was characterized with features such as overcrowded city dwellings, individualized families, money, economy, etc., creating new problems of social adaptation. Consequently, traditional social work yielded ground for professional social work." So what is important here is that Dr. Kumarappa was able to showcase that the parallel movement that happened in the West, industrial revolution, social chaos, urban decay, social work, the same chaos was replicated in India, and it is the same context in a different context which led to the evolving or the development of social work. So, which most social workers know this piece of information. The first school of social work, called the Sir Dorabji Graduate School of Social Work, was established in 1936 in Mumbai, and our institute, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, is the renamed institute of the same school. And it emerged, so this institute emerged as a response to the problems encountered by the urban population. So the teachers who first taught here have actually gone out into the field, worked with the workers in the chawls, in the factories, and if you remember, Bombay was the hub of cloth trade, cotton trade, and the amount of work that the professors of those time have done, it is well documented. Please read up Indian Journal of Social Work, which was contextually printed. It's one of the first journals of social work in India. Please read it up, you'll get all details. Now coming back, the increased industrialization by colonial powers brought in the issues of labor welfare. So it's not surprising that our institute, the first elements that were practiced in social work were labor welfare and industrial relations, medical and psychiatric social work, which was soon followed by criminology and correctional administration, family and child welfare, urban and rural community development, and soon late after that followed social welfare administration. So the growth of disciplines and the growth of specializations in the school of in Tata Institute of Social Sciences followed to the developments that happened outside. So as and when the context of vulnerability and marginalization became the immediate context for engagement, that realm of practice became a specialization in TISS. Many say the opening of Sir Dorabji Graduate School of Social Work was a stepping stone for professional social work education in India. However, Professor M.S. Gore counters this with a small little bit of information where he says that while we may have professionally began this stream of education, there were a few training institutes that were providing certain amount of training in social work. So parallelly or before Tata Institute, there was this attempt to showcase and teach social work to certain practitioners. So the first director of this institute was Clifford Mansholt. He was an American missionary and he was our founding director. The fact that an American missionary was the first founding director of this institute, it shaped the journey of this institute in a certain manner, and the social work that was practiced here is somewhere influenced by the Western notions, and it is over a period of time that the same has changed and it has become more contextual to the Indian context. Soon after TISS, there were two more schools of departments of social work that started, and interestingly both were in North India. One in Delhi, which is known as the Delhi School of Social Work, and one was the Department of Social Work in Banaras Hindu University. The social work department in Banaras Hindu University has got two uniqueness attached to it. It was one of the first departments which offered social work in both Hindi and English. And the other difference was that the founding fathers of this school claimed to evolve an educational philosophy for social work that was in tune with Indian values. So this contextual difference between the schools of social work or between the departments of social work emerged as early as this. Now the period from 1950s to 1959, many of us tend to say that this was the golden period of practice and education in social work because there was a recognition of the relevance of social work. So after the independence of India, Indian state followed a social model of centralized planning and development, and because Indian social welfare was the prime focus of the Indian state, social work practice managed to establish its importance. So the first 5-year plan report underlined the importance of social work education in an Indian context. The decade of 1950s was the period of rapid growth and expansion for social work in India, and there was an upsurge of the number of schools of social work across India. The e-text will give you a table attached telling you about the upsurge. Now, the continued expansion of social welfare programs by the state offered immediate employment opportunities for social workers. I'm sure all of you are now pricking your ears and saying employment, but please remember that employment came with a cost. So there were many acts that were passed which required social workers, ready social workers, to take on those roles. So the new labor welfare provisions provided the appointment of labor welfare officer for a factory which had a force of 500 workers. And such acts, so you had the Probation of Offenders Act, which required social workers. You had the Children's Act, which required social workers. So there were many legislations which recognized the skill subset of social workers and the need and the requirement of this skill subset to reach out to a certain population. So you can see that this was the golden period in the recognition of the practice of social work. The next period that we can take into to understand the growth of Indian professional social work is 1960s to 1980s. This period witnessed the establishment of 2 national organizations of social workers in India. In 1960s, the Association of Schools of Social Work came into existence, and in the year 1961, the Indian Association of Trained Social Workers was formed. What is important is there's recognition, there is a body of knowledge, and now there are associations formed. So the journey of professionalism is getting stronger and stronger, and in 1980s we had reached a position where forums were being formed. Now this period is very, very important because it also witnessed a major shift in the orientation of social work practice in India. There was a surge in debates, deliberating that what is it that we social workers are doing, what is it that we social work educators are teaching, and whether social work profession should focus on provision of services to the users or on promoting social change by organizing people. So the major question was that are we an arm of the state, or are we here to keep the state in check? And that became a starting point to ensure and question social work practice. So the dialogue between social work practitioners and social activists was emphasized upon. And then we come to the post-1990s. In the recent years, there is emphasis on enabling social work to respond to a variety of challenges that the state is facing. And the biggest challenge that social work has to address is the reality of exclusion and the structural aspects of injustice. So while there is a recognition that there is a certain amount of oppression that certain populations are facing, at the other end, what is important is that the economy of the country is moving in the absolute opposite dichotomous place. And why is it that we are worried? Because with the opening of the economy and the declining of the welfare state, wherever we had spaces to negotiate with the space, to address these oppressive practices, to reach out to vulnerable populations, to include marginalized populations, the shrinking welfare state spaces ensured that the state was no longer accountable. And the neoliberal policies of the state was basically maneuvering social work practice back to the 50s, where we are talking about clients being converted into consumers. So you have to come and take benefit of a certain give and take process in social work. So the new liberal ideas of user customer was basically, or even today, is ensuring that the public space of social work is shrinking. And where we had reached in the 1980s, that collective notions of empowerment will be emphasized. We are going back to the 1940s and 50s, where the user-based system is being initiated and being emphasized. So we have to be very careful that today the in practice of professional social work is challenged by many realities which are way beyond the state. So students, in this short duration, this module has traced the journey of social work in India. It began with contextualizing history sociologically, politically and economically. It has attempted to get you on board to understand history when viewed in this frame gives a clearer picture of the people, their lives and their exclusion, which are important for social workers. These two readings are critical. Please read them up and I'm sure you'll get a clearer picture and you would understand that how do we begin the journey of social work. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed and you're clearer of the social work journey.